Well, good afternoon and welcome. My name is Liz Archuleta, and I am the founding board member of HECHO and the Arizona spokesperson for HECHO, Hispanics Enjoying Camping, Hunting, and the Outdoors. Today, I will be the moderator for our panel discussion. We are pleased to present Climate Solutions in Action, Forest Restoration. I want to introduce you to Amy Dominguez, who is the HECHO Communications Coordinator, and she will go over a few nuts and bolts regarding technology and how you can answer questions on the various platforms that we have. Amy?
Thank you, Liz. Yes, hi everybody and welcome. I just quickly wanted to go over the technology that comes with Zoom. Specifically, I wanted to mention that if you are not speaking during this panel, if you could please make sure to mute your mic. Sometimes background noises can creep in and they can be distracting. Additionally, we will be having a Q&A portion, and for those with questions, if you could please navigate your way below to the chat box and select all panelists and attendees. Your questions will be able to be seen here, and we'll be able to go down the list and moderate them that way. And that is how you may ask any questions. If you're having any technology questions on your own, please make sure to send me a message and I will do my best to mitigate and help. Back to you, Liz.
Great, thank you, Amy. And Amy is joining us from Utah, and so thank you very much, Amy, for that. I would like to next introduce Camilla Simon, who is the Executive Director of HECHO, and she would like to open us up with a few remarks. Camilla?
Thanks, Liz, and welcome everybody to this event. This is the second in a four-part series on climate solutions and action. Today's event is focused on forest restoration and the impact of our changing climate on wildfires in our nation's forests, especially in the West. While our event is focused on Arizona, we have people joining from many different places, and we invite you to use the chat to let us know where you are joining us from. And today's event also coincides with the 10th day of Native American Heritage Month, and I'm participating today from the Commonwealth of Virginia, from land that was originally inhabited by the Powhatan, which was part of a larger confederacy of over 30 Native American Algonquian-speaking tribes, whose territory spanned 16,000 square miles of what is today Eastern and coastal Virginia, all the way up to Washington, D.C. So our four-part series on climate solutions and action are inspired by a striking fact from a 2018 study by the U.S. Geological Survey. That study showed that emissions from the 640 million acres that make up our federal public lands accounted for nearly a quarter of the total U.S. carbon dioxide emissions in the United States over a 10-year period. These are greenhouse gases that result from the extraction and end use of combustion of fossil fuels produced on federal lands. To put that in perspective, federal public lands would rank 5th in the world of the countries with the highest emissions if they were a country. So that sounds really bad, of course, but we see it as an opportunity because we have the power to manage our lands in a more responsible manner. And each and every one of us is part owner of our federal public lands, which means that on one side of the coin, we all have the right to enjoy and access these lands, but on the other side of the coin, we all have a responsibility to protect these lands for future generations. And that's the essence of what HECHO does and is a platform for. Through engaging in public land decision-making and advocacy, we help create greater access and equity to our public lands, local, state, and federal, while connecting to our role as stewards of the land. Back in 2013, when HECHO formed, our founders, who were Hispanic elected officials and community leaders from across the Southwest, had concerns about the impact of oil and gas development on the lands where they fished, hunted, camped, and hiked. They knew that Hispanics were among the racial ethnic groups of people who are disproportionately impacted by pollution, with African Americans exposed to 56% more pollution and Hispanics exposed to 63% more pollution than non-Hispanic whites. It's no wonder then that according to poll after poll, Hispanics find environmental issues like pollution and climate change to be extremely important on a personal level at rates that are greater than non-Hispanic whites. Still, Hispanics are also among the racial ethnic groups who are underrepresented in the decision-making processes that impact our air, water, land, health, and communities. HECHO seeks to close the gap between underrepresentation when it comes to decision-making and overrepresentation when it comes to impact from environmental harms. And even more, we believe that everyone should have equal access to the benefits of nature, and our public lands play a huge role in that. At the core of how we can accomplish this is through our mission to empower Hispanic leaders to engage their communities in the conservation of our public lands. Our local leaders are connected to our communities, and HECHO provides capacity and support to help strengthen Hispanic voices and visibility in public land decision-making. I hope you enjoy this panel. I'll pass it back to you. Thank you. Liz?
Thank you, Camilla. And before I introduce our dynamic panel, I would like to introduce the rest of the HECHO team, and I will let them introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they do. Andrea?
Good afternoon. My name is Andrea Trujillo Guajardo. I'm the new policy director for HECHO. I'm based in Denver, Colorado, and I live in Lakewood. I will be developing a policy action plan and then supporting our executive director in her function in this region, which we serve, which is Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. Thank you for hosting this.
Great, thank you. Bianca?
Hi, my name is Bianca McGrath Martinez. I'm the program manager for HECHO, and I am based in Denver, Colorado.
Great, thank you, Bianca. So today we have a very exciting panel. We have assembled 4 panelists who are going to provide their perspective on the subject of forest restoration and climate change. I want to provide a little context for it. Climate change has certainly stacked the deck in favor of bigger and more intense fires across the West over the past few decades. Science has certainly undeniably shown this, and we know that increasing heat, changing rain and snow patterns, shifts in plant communities, and other climate-related changes have vastly increased the likelihood that fires will start more often and burn more intensely and widely than they have in the past. I know this very well. In addition to my role as in HECHO, I am a county supervisor, and our county has experienced numerous fires. One of them was the most intense and devastating fire that we've ever had, the Schultz fire, which was specifically in my district and was in the wildland urban face of the peaks, the San Francisco peaks. And so I know this firsthand, how the changing weather patterns and the increasingly dry forests can cause wildfires. In fact, more than 5 million acres have already burned this year. In addition to the changing climate, deferred maintenance of forests, meaning the lack of forest thinning and restoration, has allowed for the buildup of vast amounts of vegetation that can quickly turn into fuel and is very problematic. We also see land use issues, as I mentioned, where residential communities and infrastructure is being built in the wildland urban interface, which of course increases the risk to public safety and property. I want to show this map. This is a map from National Geographic, which shows the 2020 wildfire potential in Arizona and some of the states in the West. As I mentioned, this is the largest and most critical issue facing states in the West, which is wildfire. We know that higher temperatures and drought have increased the potential for wildfire, and climate change has exacerbated these factors that creates really a perfect fire condition. Lower precipitation and warmer air temperatures dry the forests and other vegetation. You add strong winds into that and decades of fire suppression into the mix, and you have a very dangerous recipe for wildfire. So we are definitely looking at what is being done in northern Arizona in regards to forest restoration, and we believe it's a great example of what we should be doing on a larger scale on all of our forests in the United States and public lands. The U.S. forests in northern Arizona, in collaboration with Coconino County, the logging and forest products industry, and nonprofit partners, are leading the way for forest restoration. Today, we are going to hear from 4 panelists who are instrumental in helping lead this effort. And on behalf of HECHO, I want to thank them for sharing their work, their expertise, and their experience with us today. I'm going to introduce each of them right before they speak so that you know who is speaking to you. And so the first speaker today is Jay Smith. He's the Coconino County Forest Restoration Director. Jay has had a love for the outdoors for as long as he can remember, leading him into a career in forest management where he spends much of his time in the woods. Jay has served as the Coconino County Forest Restoration Director since 2018, working to increase the pace and scale of forest restoration in Coconino County to improve forest health and protect communities from catastrophic wildfires. Prior to serving Coconino County, Jay was the Senior Forester for Good Earth Power Arizona LLC, New Life Forest Products, the contractor for the Forest Restoration Initiative, and the Vice President of Harvesting Operations at Southwest Forest Products. Today, all of that, as well as him serving as Coconino County's Forest Restoration Director, is a total career of 24 years in forestry. Jay earned a Bachelor's of Science in Forest Management from Northern Arizona University, served on the elected board for the Tennessee Forestry Association for 12 years, and enjoys hunting, fishing, and camping across the Western United States. Thanks for joining us today, Jay.
Thank you, appreciate that. I'm gonna share my screen here real quick. And we'll start this. Okay, can everybody see that? As Liz mentioned,
We can see it, Jay, yes.
Okay, great, thank you. As Liz mentioned, one of the reasons that Coconino County became involved in forest restoration is it's in our back door. Coconino County is the 2nd largest county in the lower United States, and we have a large portion of our county in national forest land. And in 2010, this was a kind of a picture of the Schultz fire that she referred to as the sun was setting that night. And that Schultz fire was really the kickoff to the county determining that it was time for them to get involved in forest restoration and ways that the county can help. You'll see a few photos here of the Schultz fire. The far left is kind of the aftermath, some of the steep slopes that were burned. The middle shot is of the fire at its highest intensity that day, or not too long after it started, and then the aftermath, which is really what the county and the flood control district of Coconino County became involved heavily in, was the post-fire flooding. And what was happening was, as these fires burned on these steep slopes, the intensity of it baked the soils to where they couldn't absorb water. And then our monsoon season was right around the corner and actually hit just right after the fire was put out. And we had this catastrophic post-fire flooding that had a $140 million impact to our communities. And so that was kind of the precursor to and the kickoff to looking at how does the county get involved in forest restoration, and knowing that, the county just to remain solvent financially through our flood control district, we need to be involved in preventing the fire versus always reacting to after the fire and the post-fire effects that should come up with that. So let's talk a little bit about forest restoration and what's the need for, why do we even look at this? This top photograph in this slide is of an area in Walker Lake north of Flagstaff. And you can see that in 1875, what it kind of looked like with the amount of tree densities and amount of grass growing in between the trees, and then versus the bottom picture in 2004. So you can really see a huge difference in the amount of density of trees. And you can imagine a fire burning in that top photo, and it pretty much stays in the grass on the ground, and it burns cooler and just kind of burns through. And typically every 7 to 10 years in this area in Arizona, it's a fire adapted ecosystem that every 7 to 10 years, a fire, low, cool burning fire kind of burns through the area, kills a lot of the seedlings and replenishes the grasses. And that's kind of the cycle that goes through. But in the lower photograph, you would see that if a fire caught in that, most likely it's going to get up into the crown of the trees. It's going to burn more intensely, and it's going to be harder to stop. And so you're going to have more of what we call the catastrophic type fire that's going to affect that landscape. So here's a few pictures I've got over the next couple slides, just kind of showing what our current conditions look like in many parts of the forest versus the desired conditions that we're looking for. So picture on the left is an area that has tree densities probably closer into the 1,000, 1,500 trees per acre, when what our desired conditions or pre-settlement conditions were 10 to 50 trees per acre. So as we settled this area, the European settlement came into northern Arizona. What we found was that there were more, they started putting out the fires, not really wanting these every 7 to 10 year fires. And so when they did that, as trees had good crop years of pine cones and seed, that we would get these thickets of trees starting to grow. And without management, without some kind of mechanized control of this, you just continue to get these more dense and more dense areas that are harder and harder to control for wildfire. Again, in this one, in the left-hand photo, you see this, what we call a dog hair thicket of these small diameter trees. And then in the right-hand photo, once the thinning has been done and they've done some burning, and part of the problem is with the photo on the left, to do a prescribed fire in there, which we know is a good thing for our ecosystem, you have a harder time controlling that prescribed fire. So once we come in and thin the area, then you can come back and do the prescribed fire and putting those nutrients back into the forest. Also, as we talk about climate change and carbon, what you see here is this large tree at the left of the photograph. The amount of carbon that's being stored in that tree far outweighs the amount of carbon that's stored in those small diameter trees. So scientists have determined that, a well-managed forest that's growing larger timber, larger trees, is actually storing more carbon than an unmanaged forest that's just growing these small diameter trees that are suppressed. They're not growing, putting on much wood each year. So through management, we're actually increasing the amount of carbon storage within the forest. Some of the projects that Coconino County has worked on and is working on. This is Fort Tuthill, which is a county park that our Parks and Recreation Department runs. And they looked at this and saw the need for thinning in this area. And I wanted you to see kind of a before and after aerial photograph of what this density of trees looked like in the left-hand photo prior to the thinning operation. And then once we completed the thinning operation, and our goal was to open up what we call this interspacing between the groups of trees. And so you'll see a lot of these larger openings within the forest, and then some thick areas, and you want this diversity within the forest. So that was our goal, and I really felt like we met the goal on this thinning treatment, to where in the photo to the left, if we had a fire that came through, likely it would get up into the crowns of the trees, and we would not be able to control that fire. But now the post thinning treatments, we could easily get in, the fire would stay on the ground. We could put fire line in or attack with helicopter or aerial support, and we could put a fire out that got into this area, and which was our goal. This area is real close to some communities, and we really felt the necessity for the county to play its role in forest restoration, especially on our own properties. And lastly, the biggest project we've taken on so far pre-fire is the Bill Williams Mountain Steep Slope project that we've partnered with the National Forest Foundation, with Kaibab National Forest, and our Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, and private supporters as well through NFF, National Forest Foundation. This is a before and after picture as well. So we noticed through some studies that we conducted through FEMA in our flood control district, that Bill Williams Mountain, if it burned, and excuse me, if it burned and we had to post-fire flooding, that we had a conservative estimate for the regional economic impact of being $379 million to $694 million just from the fire and the post-fire flooding. And so we looked at this and said, this is our highest priority as a county, as a flood control district, to protect not only the mountain itself, but the water source for the
So Jay, we have a little bit of a delay in your presentation. You were talking a little bit about this being the priority area for the county, the cost of damages that would result from wildfire and post-wildfire flooding. Then you began to talk a little bit about the watershed and the water source. Can you start from there?
Sure, sorry about that. So this watershed supplies all of the water for the city of Williams, which sits at the base of the mountain. And so we saw the need to protect that watershed, and to the only way really to protect it based on the amount of timber, that the trees that are on the ground are growing there, and then the dead and down wood that's on that mountain, just from the inability to get in and access it, was to go in. We formed this partnership with the groups, the Kaibab National Forest really being the main partner. It's the land that they manage. It's owned by the federal government. And so we looked at, and how do we manage this steep slope ground? It doesn't look as steep as what it really is in the photographs here, but it required helicopter use to get this at about $10,000 an acre. So as we looked at this mountain, and we treated the first 300 acres, just finished it, and I'm sure Heather and Sasha will talk more about that project, but we realized that $10,000 an acre, so this first 300 acres cost $3 million, is really a good investment when you look at that economic impact, and then the impact of lack of water, loss of water resources for a whole community. And therefore, we, as a flood control district, we have committed part of our flood control funding to this project over the next several years, to be able to treat up to 1,000 acres or so of steep slope on this mountain, to help protect this mountain and the communities around it. I guess I will let Liz, if you want to, I will let Heather take over and I will stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you, Jay. We
Mhm.
appreciate that. And we'll have questions at the end. So keep your questions for Jay. Stand by with those and we'll get all the panelists to have a discussion at the end here. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather Provencio, who is the Forest Supervisor of the Kaibab National Forest. Heather was born and raised in Southern Illinois, Virginia, and Oregon, and grew up in a Forest Service family. She moved to Arizona in 1982 to attend Northern Arizona University and pursue a bachelor's degree in anthropology with an emphasis in archaeology. Her first job with the Forest Service was in 1985 as a firefighter on the Chevelon Ranger District of the Apache Sitgreaves National Forest. She held a variety of positions on that forest in archaeology, recreation, and business administration. And she also entered the Student Cooperative Education Program in 1998, where she attended NAU again and received her master's degree in anthropology. Her master's work focused on volunteerism and archaeology. She was converted into a full-time archaeologist position on the Apache Sitgreaves in 2000, and in 2001 transferred to the Peaks and Mormon Lakes Ranger districts of the Coconino National Forest, where she became the district archaeologist and tribal liaison. 4 years later, Heather became the Red Rock District Ranger on the same forest. She worked there until 2013, when she went to the White River National Forest in Colorado as the Deputy Forest Supervisor. In 2016, she returned to her Northern Arizona home as the Kaibab Forest Supervisor. And I'd like to turn it over now and welcome Heather.
Thank you so much, Liz, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Today, I'd like to go ahead and give you an overview of the Forest Restoration Initiative. We also refer to this as FRI for short. So I'll share the objectives of that restoration project in terms of how it's helping us address the threat. So Jake covered much of this, but I'm going to re-emphasize why is restoration needed here in Northern Arizona. 100 years ago or so, we began suppressing wildfires and we introduced grazing to national forest lands in the area. Prior to that, our forests were very open and park-like in Northern Arizona. A little bit different now, as you can see. The combination of less grass from grazing and fire suppression allowed the small trees to come in and really fill those gaps between the larger trees. With stands like this, little light reaches the ground, and so not much grass grows, not many plants grow, and there's very little biodiversity, as you can see in that bottom right picture. Stands like this also soak up what little water is in the area, so we actually see springs go dry. And they don't allow for moisture to actually hit the ground. They hit the canopy, but don't hit the ground very well. There's a lot of competition between these trees, and the trees are way less healthy and vulnerable to insects, disease, and they just don't get very big. So fire plays a natural role in ponderosa pine ecosystems like ours. In the past, when the forest was less dense and more open, like these two top photos, lightning would start fires regularly in the summertime, and they burned at low intensity, clearing up debris on the forest floor and introducing nitrogen and other important nutrients, and generally keeping the forest much more open. As you look at the bottom two slides, once we started suppressing wildfires, and areas were overgrazed in the late 1800s, fire was essentially kept out or kept off of the national forest. And as a result, the forest got dense, like you saw in the last picture. And with gradual drying trends over the past 3 decades and even more rapid drying trends recently, when fires take hold, they tend to be way more intense because there is so much fuel. The vegetation is so dry, they tend to wipe out everything in their path and bake the soils, which means rain can't even penetrate after fires. This leads to ash-filled reservoirs and threatens our state's clean water sources. So a decade ago, the Forest Service recognized that fires were getting progressively larger and more intense, and that we needed to do something more drastic than the small burning projects, the small logging and thinning projects we had traditionally done. We knew we needed to go big and treat faster if we were going to get ahead of the problem. So we took on the Forest Restoration Initiative with the help of a very diverse group of stakeholders. We had loggers, environmentalists, professors, fly fishermen, just to name a few. And that group is really key to our success in this restoration project. So ForFry extends essentially from the Grand Canyon in northern Arizona all the way to the east to the border with New Mexico and covers about 2.4 million acres. Our objectives are to thin up to 50,000 acres a year at little to no cost to the government and to reintroduce fire across those areas. There's some real urgency in getting trees thinned and our forests back to a healthy, resilient state, given the yearly threats of large fires that we've already talked about. We've seen those threats and felt them very personally here in northern Arizona, as Liz expressed. And when we have fires like that, we lose wildlife habitat, recreation opportunities, clean water, homes, livelihoods, and sometimes tragically, even lives. So why do we go so big? The main reason is that that's what's needed ecologically. Ecologically speaking, we won't make much of a difference across a vulnerable landscape if we just take bite-sized pieces at restoration. In the face of large fire threats, we need to treat entire watersheds to protect wildlife and plants and keep our water abundant and clean. And by the way, the vast majority of our water in the United States comes from national forest lands. Economics are another big reason to go big. To complete the needed thinning of trees, we needed to reestablish the logging industry in northern Arizona. We issued a large 10-year contract in hopes that we would make it profitable for industry to invest in the area. They made a go of it on the west side, essentially from about the Grand Canyon to a little east of Flagstaff. But they really never quite got rolling in the way that we needed them to. It's virtually impossible to go from 0 to 90 or to take industry from no industry to thriving industry in just a few short years, especially when the trees we have are so small and so low value. It's mostly those smaller trees that we need thinned, not the big ones that tend to be more profitable because they can be sold as lumber. But Congress recently responded to our challenge with a new authority that allows the Forest Service to offer 20-year contracts. The idea is that businesses are more likely to get loans on a 20-year guarantee of work, and that amount of guarantee makes it much more worthwhile to invest in an area in the first place. So I also don't want to forget about the benefits of working at a landscape scale when it comes to socio-political reasons. You know, we have to do environmental analysis before we can do any restoration activities. And those analyses involve the public and getting feedback from them, getting buy-in from the public. And they take a very long time and cost a lot of money. So it makes a lot of sense that instead of doing many small acre projects, that we would instead do very large scale NEPA and have few of those so that we can get through the analysis and get to the implementation more quickly. And then finally, I want to make the point, and Jay already said this, but it is a whole lot cheaper to thin and prescribe burn a forest, to restore a forest, than it is to respond to a wildfire, to suppress the wildfire, and certainly to clean up and repair after a wildfire. So I want to end by showing a few slides as well. These are a few, it's an example of some restoration work we've done east of Flagstaff in northern Arizona. And as you can see, the dense trees that we had in 2012, pretty typical for this area. And if you go to the right, you can see as we cut those trees, there's still plenty of trees left. But we did take down quite a few. And then on the bottom left, you can see after we burned the area, quite a bit more open than the slide above. And then finally, a few years later, you can see how the grasses just come in wonderfully after all of our treatments are done. And it does take constant reentry of fire to keep the system healthy. So big difference between that slide in the top left and the slide in the bottom right there. In terms of the top right, you got pine needles on the ground, very little biodiversity, and that bottom, I'm sorry, the top left, and the bottom right, you have some beautiful biodiversity there. When we have fires in areas like that, they're going to burn much cooler and be much more beneficial in the future. So I'm going to leave it at that, Liz, and turn it back to you.
Great. Thank you, Heather. Really appreciate that. Appreciate the visuals. Those are, the contrast is very apparent. So I'm going to turn it over to Sasha Storz, who's the National Forest Foundation Arizona Program Manager. Sasha joined the National Forest Foundation in 2020 as the Arizona Program Manager, where she focuses on development, partnership building, and implementation of priority forest restoration, watershed health, and recreation projects on the national forests. She has over 12 years of experience working in collaborative natural resource management with land managers, researchers, tribes, and other stakeholders. Prior to joining the National Forest Foundation, Sasha led a collaborative planning program at Northern Arizona University, where she facilitated multi-stakeholder groups, developing strategies around issues such as climate adaptation, excuse me, forest restoration, post-fire restoration, conservation prioritization, water resources, and tribal co-management. Excuse me. One second, please. Thank you. She also studied threatened waterfowl in the Alaskan Arctic with the USGS, worked as a program associate with the U.S. Institute for Conflict Resolution, and led programs across the globe for National Geographic student expeditions. Sasha received her MS in Environmental Sciences and Policy from Northern Arizona University and her BA in Biology at Lewis and Clark College. When she's not at work, she enjoys mountain biking and hiking with her family in her Arizona backyard and fishing in her home state of Alaska. Welcome, Sasha.
Thanks so much, Liz. Thanks for having me today and to be part of this panel. Are you seeing my slides on my screen?
We do. We can see it. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So as Liz said, I'm Sasha Storz. I'm the Arizona Program Manager for the National Forest Foundation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the National Forest Foundation and just highlight a couple of projects briefly that really focus in on the various forest restoration efforts that we're a part of. So the National Forest Foundation was actually established by Congress, and we were created with the mission to bring people together to restore and enhance our national forests and grasslands. We're the leading organization inspiring personal connections to our national forests, the centerpiece of our federally managed lands. So we really work on behalf of the American public to lead forest restoration and conservation efforts and to promote responsible recreation. And we really believe that our national forest system, these lands and all they provide are vital to the health of all of our communities. So we work by collaborating to develop relationships and understand local partnership needs for what's needed for a place. We bring together funds for community capacity and projects that enhance those outdoor experiences and forest health. And we work to engage all Americans through volunteerism, collaboration, and project planning. We're primarily a fundraising and an implementation partner is kind of what this boils down to. And we have a number of different programs. We give out grants for nonprofits and tribal entities to implement restoration projects on the ground. We have youth engagement programs. We support collaborative conversations on a variety of forest issues. And we have regional programs that focus on the on-the-ground implementation of forest restoration projects, watershed restorations, and recreation. So we're a national organization, and I focus on our Southwest program, primarily Arizona and New Mexico as well. So in this region, we do a lot with watershed health, both with forest restoration as well as projects that reduce erosion and have other downstream benefits. We also have youth programs and other strategic partnerships as well. So one way that we do a lot of our work in Northern Arizona is through the Northern Arizona Forest Fund. When we talk about forest restoration, you've heard that there's this connection to water there, that what happens kind of at the top of a watershed can influence the health and safety of communities, both from a fire risk perspective and a post-fire flood perspective. And erosion from these big fire events can affect water supplies and water quality quite a bit downstream. And so the concept of that idea that downstream beneficiaries are tied to what happens upstream is really the Northern Arizona Fund's premise, that we can bring together partners throughout the watersheds and who benefit from watershed restoration treatments and work together to raise the resources needed to get implementation done on the ground. So, there's been this great overview of why forest restoration is important, the role that forests play in carbon sequestration and the impacts of these big fires on the climate, as well as these other important ecological and social connections. But you know, how do we get it done? We work kind of primarily in two ways that are kind of two sides of the restoration coin, you might say. One is to reduce the hazardous fuels in these overgrown, dense forests before a fire that is high severity or kind of outside of that range of historic variability can come in and try to bring healthy dynamics back to the landscape. But we also work in areas that maybe have had some of these big fire events. And we also support tree planting efforts in areas that might need some help after a fire. If there's a system that has the potential to become a forest again, where the soils and conditions allow it, but it needs a bit of help with that regeneration. So I'm going to share a bit of a forest thinning example and a tree planting example as well. So you've heard a bit from Jay and from Heather about our Bill Williams partnership. So I won't belabor this, but you know, the city of Williams sits at the base of Bill Williams Mountain, where fire suppression and other management over the past 100 years has led to conditions with a high fire risk and high post-fire flooding risk that would really impact the city of Williams and the surrounding infrastructure. You can see some of the dead and down trees in this area that just would carry a lot of fire if a fire were to move through there. And so we've worked to begin thinning some of the highest priority areas above the city on Bill Williams Mountain to kind of address some of this fire risk as well as all the other major impacts. So Coconino County did a flood study and brought funding resources to the table for this. The Kaibab National Forest had completed an environmental impact statement for the mountain and also had resources ready to go. But these sorts of complicated projects, it's not one entity that can do this work by ourselves. So we came into play a bit of a bridge role as a development and implementation partner in treating some of the most complex and expensive areas on the mountain, areas that can't be implemented through just a traditional timber contract, but need some additional resources. So you hear a lot about collaboration as bringing people together to agree on what should happen for public lands. There's a formal public input process through the National Environmental Policy Act to bring stakeholders into the planning process. But once plans for what happens on forest lands are approved, the need for partnership and collaboration really doesn't end. So we were able to work together with the funding partners and groups like through the Northern Arizona Forest Fund, who were ready to see the benefits of these treatments happening. We were able to work with the county, the forest, state agencies, cities, as well as private foundations. And we acted as an implementation partner. So that means that we contracted to do the work, and it was quite the complex operation, a hand thinning on super steep slopes and then helicopter removal. So this helicopter was going back and forth and moving the trees that had come down to this processing area. It was really quite the dance to see it all in action. So I'm pleased to say that we wrapped up the helicopter operations on this first 300 acres in October. And with this project, as well as another project at the foot of Bill Williams Mountain, we were able to get to about 900 acres of treatment this year by working together in collaboration to get implementation done. So that's kind of a forest restoration thinning story. And then I wanted to share a little bit about climate and tree planting as well. So in the Jemez Mountains, hopping over to New Mexico, on the eastern flank, we've seen Las Conchas and Cerro Grande, two really massive fires that have burned thousands of acres. There's been some repeat high severity fire, which has caused conditions where trees aren't necessarily coming back on their own. There's also been some really intense post-fire flooding that has impacted the watersheds that go all the way down to Santa Fe and Albuquerque. We were able to work with other partners like the Nature Conservancy, the Santa Fe National Forest, Bandelier National Monument, and several Pueblo communities, all in the footprint of these high severity fires, to really come together and say, what do we do after events like this happen? This is an example of what we're hoping not to see in some of these areas where we're doing the thinning, but when it does happen, how do we move forward and how do we work together to grapple with this changed landscape? And one thing that we're working together on right now with the Nature Conservancy, with New Mexico State University's tree nursery, and with Santa Clara Pueblo is on a tree planting project. This is kind of a unique effort. These baby seedlings here are going through a little bit of tree torture. So they're being raised in a nursery. And a lot of times when you think about that, you think about a comfortable climate and a lot of consistent watering. But these trees are going out into a very dry, open area, as you can see here. They don't have the benefits of shade from other mature trees. And so the way these trees are being raised is with really limited water and in kind of stressed conditions. And what researchers are finding is when they go out on the landscape, they have some better survival rates. So kind of bringing in that climate adaptation into restoration again. We're looking at both these upland areas with the conifer species, as well as some of the riparian areas, bringing back some of the shady trees, willows and cottonwoods that can really restore the whole creek habitat and allow conditions for native fish to thrive in these canyons again as well. So, doing this work is a solution for a lot of issues, right? We have the carbon sequestration benefits that have been mentioned, as well as community connection to place and health and safety, forest health, fire and flood risk reduction. So, from a lot of different perspectives, we're trying to get these projects implemented in partnership. I'll pass it on to the next panelist.
Great. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you so much for sharing that. Our final panelist for this afternoon is Devon Suarez. Devon is the owner of Suarez Forestry LLC. He was born and raised near the Mogollon Rim in Arizona. His family has been involved in the forest products industry for 6 decades. Devon spent much of his childhood in the woods for recreation and helping his dad run a small firewood company. Devon graduated from Arizona State University in 2011 with a BA in political science, and in 2017 he received a JD from the Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law at Arizona State University. During these studies, he focused on natural resource and environmental law, administrative law, and federal Indian law. During and after his college years, Devon worked at the United States Forest Service for 7 years. There, he worked in the timber department, preparing timber projects as well as other silviculture projects. In 2017, Devon started a family forestry company, Suarez Forestry LLC. The aim of Suarez Forestry is to build job opportunities for the family and others, as well as treating acres to restore our public forests. Suarez Forestry works with nonprofit organizations and government agencies to restore ponderosa pine forests in northern Arizona. Welcome, Devon.
Thank you. Thank you guys, everyone, for having me today. I just want to talk today about first my family's company, and given that perspective, of being a Hispanic or Latino business in a pretty interesting industry. Then I would like to also talk about first the need for this industry and why specifically we need this industry to survive. Second, the struggles of this industry, which are many. I'd like to highlight some of the most important ones that I think we can address, and I think everyone on this panel has a stake in being able to restore and manage our forests properly. So I think our industry is very vital to that end. Maybe some solutions on to how we can help this help mitigate the struggles that this industry faces. And then what I see as the ideal situation for this industry to thrive in. So first, I'd like to start off with giving a little bit of a background into my family and my family's history in the forest products industry and why I decided to get into this industry. I think making the jump from law school to being a logger or a lumberjack, or however you want to title that, I think it's a pretty interesting jump. But I guess my family story starts in being in the forest products industry. My grandpa worked for sawmills in northern and eastern Arizona since about the 1950s until the 1990s. He worked particularly in the Heber, Arizona sawmill, and he did work around other sawmills where they did need the help. My dad, my uncles, and some of my cousins have also worked in the logging industry specifically for about 45 years. So I thought it was a natural fit to try to bring my expertise from a legal background and my work at the Forest Service and mesh those into a forestry company that brings in my family's knowledge and experience in the forests industry. So I think this comes from a sort of natural calling, pardon the pun, to work and tend to the land. I think this story kind of starts in Mexico, where my family is from, where we come from an agricultural family. They are close and they tend to the land, they care for the land, and I think that just carries over to being disposed to caring for the land and tending to the land. So I think that when you have those type of tendencies, as my family immigrated to the U.S., it was either be an agricultural family, or I think a natural step is being a forest industry family. They settled in Arizona, and the forest industry was big in the time when they were here. So a little background of Suarez Forestry. It was a company that I started in 2017. I had been trying to start it for a few years before that, but finally the opportunity presented itself in 2017. And I think our mission is first to provide solid jobs and job opportunities for my family and for others that have the expertise and have the knowledge and can provide and can help further our missions. I think our overarching mission is to treat acres and reduce fire severity and intensity. Again, that's tending to the land, caring for the land. I think I'd like to highlight some of the struggles that our industry faces. I think the biggest hurdle that we face right now in northern Arizona is the lack of infrastructure. There are some sawmills that are taking our products. There are some biomass plants that do burn biomass to generate electricity. However, our main sawmill that we deliver to is about 160 miles from our project. And at some point, that transport cost becomes almost prohibitive in doing business. we have to find ways to price our product and our services in order to maximize what we can treat, what we can accomplish on the ground, while also being able to be profitable. I think that's a very fine line that we have to walk. And not only that, some of our mills are 160 miles. Some of our the biomass plant that we deliver to is about 100 miles away. So I think that lack of infrastructure is very, I guess it binds our hands into where we can actually deliver our product. Secondly, is with those high costs of transport, high costs in machinery, you see a lot of highly leveraged companies. I know that we have to get fairly indebted in order to operate. Especially this is a low value product that we do deal with. Ponderosa pine is not a very valuable wood for making lumber or whatever products that could be made with these. The primary product that is made with our lumber, with our timber, is pallets. So you're looking at very low margins all across the board. And I think when we say that that's our product, our product, at least my company's product, is not just the log that we ship out off of the wood. I think that we have a very important responsibility that our product is also the acre of land that we treat and how we leave that for the taxpayer. The taxpayer, we're all collectively owners of the forest. So I think that we have to keep that in mind, and how we treat the land, how we operate, making sure that they're first professional operations, and that we keep in mind that what we do on that piece of land, on that acre, it will affect that acre for generations. So we try to treat it right the first time while we're there. If it's thinning, if it's whatever other operation that we're doing on that acre of land, we have to maximize the ability to which we can affect that acre of land and keep that acre of land going for forest restoration purposes. We can't, I guess we can't mess it up and leave it to be burned. So we have to be there. We have to be there once, but we also have to keep in mind that we're doing it effectively. And I think one of the problems that we see is what do we value? What do we value in that acre of land? I think there was I don't know if this is still an active debate, but there was a debate maybe a few years ago of, well, what is cheaper? Is it cheaper to let it burn, or is it cheaper to treat it? I think sometimes some of these some arguments say that, well, it might just be cheaper to let it burn, and economically maybe it makes more sense. However, I think even the purpose of all of us being here, the HECHO's as a mission statement is that we value the land, and we value the state that it's in right now, and conserving and preserving the state that it's in. I think in order to maximize the conservation of that acre of land, or of our forests in a broad sense, is that we value that land as it is. We don't value it as an economic engine. We just value that it has an inherent value, that we have to treat that acre in order to treat other acres. Like I think, as Heather was saying earlier, this is a landscape scale treatment. So we have to maximize each acre across the whole landscape. And I think that valuing each acre, valuing the state of the forest, the state of each timber stand inherent in its forest state, I think it is very important to keep that in mind and try to be wary of those arguments that say that it's better to let it burn. I think it's anyone here that is either an outdoorsman or that we go out in the woods to recreate or whatever we value the forest. I think it's very important to keep that in mind, that we see value inherently in that acre of land. So like some struggles that we see in the industry is that some of these sawmills and plants that we deliver to are so far away, and that we've actually been approached by I guess biomass plants in Asia for some of our products. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that some of our infrastructure here is so lacking that we have delivered some of our wood to South Korea in a test pilot program last year, that took some of our wood, chipped it, and sent it to South Korea as a biomass to burn and generate electricity. So I think that kind of just highlights and reflects that we need that sort of infrastructure, sawmills, biomass plants, whatever the need is, whatever that infrastructure is, we need that here in northern Arizona or wherever those treatments are taking place. If we're going across the West Coast, I think some areas are more well developed and have better markets than Arizona. And I think Arizona needs that type of investment and that type of infrastructure. I think some solutions to these problems, I think one of the key themes today has been the nonprofits and the collaborative approach. So we are very fortunate to work with a nonprofit organization, the Nature Conservancy, and I think our company would not be possible without that partnership that we have established with the Nature Conservancy. Those nonprofits, if it's the Forest Foundation or the Nature Conservancy, these projects that they keep taking on, that backing by that nonprofit adds that stability that I think this industry lacks. If we were just dealing with the sawmills themselves, I think it sometimes you see sawmills struggling to pay their bills or whatever the struggle may be, and these nonprofits are being able to provide that stability and security that we loggers need. I think the collaborative approach that we've been talking about is very, very important. When you bring all the stakeholders to the table, you prevent litigation at that point. You're able to proceed with these projects, and the best way to do that is to bring all the stakeholders to the table at the time, continue that conversation throughout the project, before the project, during the project, and after the project, to just keep to bring every voice to the table. I think historically, the logging industry and perhaps the government agencies and some of these environmental groups have been pretty adversarial against each other. And I think it's important to avoid that adversarial model and be more collaborative. That way we can better treat our forests. And that way, I think, I'm not a scientist, but I think the science is pretty clear that we are facing a climate change catastrophe. And if we don't treat our forests, I think it's very important. It's very likely that we lose our forests. So as Jay was saying earlier, a big mature tree stores more carbon than a whole bunch of dog hair thicket stands throughout its timber stand. So I think at least my argument is that we need to treat these forests in order to store carbon. If we let them just burn, then yeah, we release carbon and we have no carbon storage. But if we're able to treat them, then those forests will perpetually be a carbon storage. So I guess sort of to wrap up, I'd like to see my ideal solution for our problems and what the ideal state of our industry is. I think a collaborative approach, if that's working with the Nature Conservancy or the Forest Foundation or any other nonprofit that is out there and willing to step up and take on these projects, I think that is one of the best models going forward. Bringing stakeholders to the table and building the trust. I think loggers might have a bad connotation that we're cutting trees. Yeah, I think we are cutting trees, but we're also leaving that acre better and more able to take on these low intensity fires and help us in fire management. I think we also have some big players that once they can build that infrastructure, I think those big players are needed in order to help us treat these forests. I think if we're serious about forest management and treating our forests, I think we need them at the table as well. Community engagement, just dispelling those notions that loggers are bad and that we're cutting trees, and make them aware of what we're doing. I think this forum is an important step in that direction, letting the general public know why we're cutting these trees and why we're treating this forest.
And Devon, that's actually a really good segue into some of the questions that we've gotten that I think are specific probably to you as someone who's in the industry. So would you mind if I just ask a question about that?
No, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. So, and I'm gonna do a couple of like rapid fire questions for our panelists, just because I want to get through many of them. We have some questions from people who have joined us. And so it says, basically, do contracts require slash pile removal? Have the National Forests cleared the backlog of forest restoration projects? And so maybe, Devon, maybe just real quickly, you can answer, do the contracts require slash pile removal? And then I'll have Heather answer the other one.
I guess that depends on what the contract is. We have worked on contracts where slash removal is required. And we also have, we're currently working on one that it's not required, but we do so anyway. So I guess depending on market conditions and the contract, we don't always remove them, but we can if that's an option.
Okay, great. And Heather, have the National Forest cleared the backlog of forest restoration projects?
Yeah, so if you're referring to the slash piles you might see out there, or the slash just left across the ground after timber treatments, we wait a certain amount of time before we burn those. So there's always an abundance of work to do there. I can tell you on our forest alone, we prescribed burn 40,000 acres last year. That's huge. And across the Forefry footprint, I think it was around 120,000 acres. So we're continually working on that. In some places, it's more difficult. You saw Sasha's picture of Bill Williams Mountain. Virtually impossible to burn that without causing greater problems. So finding a way to remove that slash without burning it. And then we're always dealing with ADEQ and air quality. So there's a lot of challenges out there, plenty of work to do.
Okay, and then there's a question, and I think, Sasha, you might have addressed this a little bit too, but many of these severe burn areas are not seeing regrowth of forests, but rather shrubs due to climate change. How do we address this?
Yeah, so that's something that has definitely been grappled with in that East Jemez example and in other areas of the region as well. And I think with the news showing greater frequency and intensity of fires across the West, more and more places will be grappling with this. What happens when a different system kind of comes back after a fire? And there's science involved in that decision. There's human values. In the East Jemez project, some of the conversation around what do we do in these areas that are not coming back involves understanding the new fire regime and if these shrublands need to be managed for like a new type of fire risk, managing invasive species, managing for wildlife. There can be benefits to these shrub areas to have these more open areas for wildlife. And then some areas there is the tree planting option. So are there ways that we can plant seedlings that have a good chance of surviving out in these open areas and bringing back some forest to these landscapes? You know, another important element that's coming up in the East Jemez is, are there culturally important plants that we need to be working to maintain across these landscapes, and what does that look like as well in the context of what is or isn't coming back? So a lot of dialogue, a lot of bringing science and values and policy together, and and hopefully charting a path that other places can learn from.
Okay, and then another just kind of rapid fire question here. One of our attendees said that where are you in your forest management plan? Are you abiding by the 2012 forest planning rule? And do you consider ecosystem services in your restoration process? Heather, probably this question for you.
Yeah, sure. So all of the forests involved in the Poor Forest Restoration Initiative have new forest plans under the new rule, with the exception of the Tonto, and they're very, very close on that. Nevertheless, we are following the direction in that. It's more general and frankly allows us the flexibility to take on a large scale project like this. So it's working well. We have also had some revisions to the rule in terms of expediting our process, which also plays well to our objectives here with restoration, just increasing the pace and scale. I hope that answers that.
That's great. Yeah, and then I think Devon and maybe Jay too, a question about pellet wood product is profitable, but without some stimulus funding to help this infrastructure and communities, it's not sustainable. How do we support these types of infrastructure?
Well, I think some of these wood products are profitable. I think some of those margins start shrinking. If we're delivering wood 160 miles, that puts us at a disadvantage. You know, if we work in the Coconino or the Kaibab forest, compared to someone that works either on the Apache stick reefs, where their mills are a little bit closer, it puts us at a disadvantage. And I think there are some examples of contracts that do have, I wouldn't say subsidies, but they have that funding available that helps compete with those other, I guess, other companies that they have shorter haul routes. So I think that those types of contracts and those types of funding mechanisms are very helpful for a company like ours that we have to deliver 160 miles away. I think those types of contracts help us out. How can we support those industries? I think being part of these sort of nonprofit groups, the Nature Conservancy, Forest Foundation, and any nonprofit that's helping out with funding for these projects, contributing to those projects, I think is very important.
I would also add, I would just add that, you know, groups like HECHO, I think play the role that you guys can play is as you reach out to federal and state legislators, that you understand that with low value timber, like we have in Northern Arizona and other parts of the country, that forest restoration, that groups understand that, hey, we're okay with subsidies for forest restoration. We understand that the billions of dollars we're spending to put fires out, if that was being used to promote and to help fund forest restoration in these areas, that we're going to come out better in the long run. And I think that's a story that needs to be told over and over again, because some of our legislators don't quite get that yet. They're not willing to put federal dollars towards some of that, and yet we're still spending FEMA dollars and Forest Service funds to put these fires out. So, you know, rather than putting it into industry, creating jobs, creating products, you know, that we could be supporting that way through government funding.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you, Jay. Not too long ago, I testified at a Senate hearing about what I call deferred maintenance of forests. I mean, just like we have deferred maintenance at our national parks, whether that be roads or water pipelines or trails, we have, you know, deferred maintenance of our forests, and that deferred maintenance is lack of forest restoration, forest thinning. So we need to make sure that our members of Congress understand that. And that is something that every single one who is participating in this workshop today, all of our attendees can certainly do, is to talk about the importance of funding forest restoration. And you're right, it's a much better investment on the front end, the cost per acre to do forest restoration than the cost of wildfire, economic loss, as well as possible loss of lives. And so, well, I want to thank all the panelists for this great conversation today. I want to thank you for joining HECHO and our panelists, those who have tuned in. Thank you for this discussion on climate solutions and action, forest restoration. We hope that you're leaving this event with a few key takeaways on how forest restoration works and what you can do to advocate for increased resources to amplify and expand forest restoration efforts and support industries that use small diameter, low value timber from forest restoration. There's one way you can be an advocate, and I'm going to ask Bianca from HECHO to talk a little bit about that. Bianca?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Thank you to everyone who stuck around. Keep in touch with us and keep up with our work. And I highly recommend that you keep up with the work of all of our panelists here today. So you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at HECHO Online. And you can also join our digital advocacy network to get updates on issues that are important to HECHO's work. We hope that you will join us on the remaining 2 events of this series, and that'll happen within the next couple of months. And if you follow us on our social media, you'll definitely get updates about that. Next week, Liz will be part of another event that is a legislative update, and that'll be on, I think, on November 18th at noon. So yeah, just stay updated with what we're doing, and we hope to see you guys at future events.